This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy.
Bobby Capuccio, welcome back to your show and mine. Here we are, Roll with the Punches and the Self-Help Antidote. It's Sunday, it's not right now, it's Thursday and Wednesday for us, and it's Sunday for all the people listening to these words right now. Good morning, you and everybody else.
I would love that greeting the next time we meet at a coffee shop.
All right, well, I'm going to note that down and make sure that is how I greet you next time we meet at a coffee shop, or the first time we meet at a coffee shop, because we only ever get to meet at the metaphorical coffee shop that is Zoom.
Well, we meet at conferences. We get to meet at big events, not often, but every once in a while there's an epic event that will bring us together.
And how great will it be one day when that big event is just a coffee? Like when you're here for a big event, but the big event is I just get to shoot you a message and go, hey, do you want to catch up for a coffee before this big event? And that can be our big event. And then I can practice that greeting again.
The event before the big event.
Yes, the pre-event event.
I'll drink more coffee than Craig Harper. I don't know if I can handle it.
Hey, on that greeting and, you know, the result that it brings, we were talking about having a conversation. This is one of my favourite conversations, to be honest. Something I love kind of reflecting on and thinking about and being aware of, and hopefully more often than not taking responsibility for that it's all my fault.
Mm-hmm.
All of it. It's all my fault. And when I've talked about it before, I talk about it from the standpoint of it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. And I think that's probably a better way to frame it so people don't get all blamey on themselves.
Yeah, because blame, whether it's inwardly directed or outwardly directed, is not very productive. And it truly isn't about fault. I mean, you hear so many things. So many people have belief systems. I heard David Gillespie on the U Project talking to Craig Harper about success. And everyone's like, well, success is a decision. There are people who have worked very hard and made very good decisions, but there is an element of luck to it. There are other variables, which is hard to face because that means things are out of my control. It doesn't mean that you don't work hard. It doesn't mean that you don't learn from past mistakes and make better decisions. It just means that everything is in play. So the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And when something goes wrong, sometimes it's directly the result of something you did or failed to do. It's your fault. But a lot of times it's not. You couldn't have done anything different with the information you had. And even if you had information, some variables are just out of your control. Is that fault? No. But is that responsibility? Responsibility, if you break it down, is just simply the ability to respond. And that's within your domain. And then other times you're just a complete muppet.
Yeah, but also the way in which we choose to respond not only changes the experience of the circumstances, but sometimes that then changes the circumstances. Get it right, Tiff. Bloody hell, stumbling over all of my words. They're all sitting in my mouth waiting to come out at once and trying to get out all at once, all come out first. So I'm just going to get them to, I'm just going to get them back into an orderly line, get back into an orderly cue words, and one at a time. I want to tell you about this morning. So I had one client, and then I was going for a walk with someone. So I got to the gym to park, and parking was a bit, chaotic. And there was one park in the bus zone, and the bus zone is free until 8 a.m. and then it's the bus zone, so you can't park there. And I had a 7:15 client finishing at 8 a.m. and I'm like, well, if I finish that on time and scoot straight out, I'll be sweet. So, of course, Chatty makes that decision, and then after my client finishes, I was chatting to somebody and I said, I'm parked in a bus zone, I have to run. So I run to the front of the gym, and then Chatty gets to the front of the gym and starts chatting to Dom, who works on the front desk. And Chatty couldn't stop chatting to him. And I'm like, I got to go. Me and my dog, we got to go. I've been parked in the bus zone. We'll talk to you about this later. And then as I go out, and I was in a real sprightly, energetic mood. I was about to go for a walk with someone. I was pretty excited. So I'm running out and I go and I'm half opening the door. And then I look the car in front of me and there's a lady kind of half behind the car. And then I realise as I'm starting to get in the car clumsily with all my crap, I realise that she's the ticket lady and she's in the middle of issuing a ticket to me. And she looks up and I look up and I was like, oh, I'm so chatty. I'm sorry. I'm so chatty. But I had this smile on my face. I was jovial. I was like, bugger. Normally I'd be angry because, that's a lot of money, especially a bus zone. It would have been hundreds of dollars. And she kind of looked at me and I was like, and I was chaotic because I had all these bags I was trying to put in the car and I was getting the dog in it. And she was like, just get your dog in the car. And I go, okay. And I was like, I'm so sorry. She goes, yeah, you got a bit more. And she kind of looked and then she goes, she nodded. She said, I haven't finished it, so I can delete, but I just really urge you to look at, just be mindful of the time. And I was like, yeah, I'm so sorry. I was really cutting it fine. Hey, I was like, thank you so much. Because I was so aware that she didn't have to do that. She was halfway through. She probably gets a quota. She probably makes money off getting that ticket. I don't know. But I was so grateful, right? So then I felt good. And I was like, hang on. In most instances, I would have been angry because I chose to park in a spot where I shouldn't be, and then I chose to keep talking, and then I was going to get a big fine, right? So all of my fault. But I would have been angry at her for doing her job, obviously, because it would have been expensive, and I wouldn't have been grateful. I wouldn't have felt I just felt so really blessed and grateful for that moment, right, which was really come off the back of something that was negative. Now, as I left, I thought to myself, if I had have come out, probably 8 out of 10 instances, I would have been disgruntled and angry. And it's highly likely she would have just written the ticket because it wasn't a nice experience for her. But because I was jovial and it was a nicer interaction between us, I think that's why she was like, hey, okay, just be careful.
Yeah, it's direct causality, isn't it? So many times, like, we blame everybody else. We blame the system. We blame the person writing out the ticket. It kind of is part of the job description. I remember one bloke was not handicapped, parked right in a handicapped spot. There were other spots, but one of those, this is right in front of the door, and went into a place called Pete's Coffee Shop, came out, he was getting a ticket. Guy went mental, absolutely. And I saw this guy because he was a member at one of my gyms. And he had the same disposition with absolutely everyone and everything. And he's just screaming at this cop, which is not, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think the police officer is going to, wow, since you put it that way, so angrily. Yeah, I'm reflecting on my own behavior. And first of all, you're in a handicap spot. I mean, there's few things that say, like, I'm a piece of shit more than that. So if anything, you'd think that would upon reflection, create a little bit of humility. It didn't. And then, so the cop just kept on, like, I think just looking for stuff. It's like, all right, let's play this game a little bit. And it's like, and how do you possibly rationalize that is not your fault? It's all about self-awareness. When people talk about, you can talk about any aspect of growth and self-help and psychology. The bottom line is self-awareness is the key to the lock on. Because think about it, you can have information, you can have knowledge, you can have insight. If you're not self-aware, you can't really apply that in real time in a meaningful way to your life. And you have no idea how you impact those around you. Yeah. Like those posts about people who have struggled with drug addiction, or maybe they were arrested when they were younger and they turned their entire life around. There's always one person going, once a junkie, always a junkie, or once a criminal, always a criminal. It's like, first of all, what's your mental model of the world? So you mean that even if somebody turns their entire life around, and that's like years and years in the past, every single person should be judged by the worst thing they've ever done. But not you, because these are usually the people, well, I wouldn't do that because I make good decisions and I'm good. And you probably have a horrific impact on the people around you. To me, the worst people are not the people who screw up. For me, the worst people are those that will never acknowledge that they're doing. I mean, we talk about this a lot. Those people absolutely scare me. I have no malevolence in me. I have no weakness in me. I'm strong. I make good decisions. Relationships that don't work out, that is completely the result of something that was deficient in someone I dated. Let me guess. You dated a narcissist. Okay. Yeah, great. Or a sociopath. None of that's you. Those people, they'll keep moving that behavioral line until there is no line. Those are the people that when like the shit really hits the fan, they could become monsters in society. Those people scare me. And it's like, if you don't have grace with yourself, how could you, and other people, how could you take responsibility? Because you go into either blaming others or you have that level of rigidity with yourself. So you go back into that psychological loop that keeps you stuck and ruminating and in your past behaviors or thought patterns. And that's more of a predictor to the degree that you're going to repeat those patterns, not reconcile them versus, okay, not my fault, or maybe it is my fault, but it is my responsibility. Something needs to change. I did that, or I'm like that, or I have that character trait. Now what? Now what do I do? Because I was thinking about this the other day, right? Where something had happened. It was just one of these things where the person in front of you is at the checkout counter. They're in the supermarket and they don't have as much money as they thought they did. And they're looking to buy stuff. And it's like, oh, now they've got to go, to the cash point or ATM, if you like, or they simply have to start putting stuff away. And somebody just like went to the, I was like, you know what? I was like, put that stuff all on my bill. I'll pay for that. And then I got out of the shop before like the person could like come back to the counter. And because I was in a rush and I didn't want an interaction, I just left the shop. I said, but I would like to be that person more of the time, because sometimes I got blinders on and I'm just like stressed out or I'm in a rush. And it's like, if you can let go of all that fault or blame or angst, which is easier said than done. If you can decide clearly what type of person you want to be, you don't necessarily need to feel like being that person. Just engage in those behaviors that type of person would engage in. And over time, you'll become that type of person. Your beliefs will be, we talked about Mimi Silbert, the Delancey Street program. I love that story because it takes individuals that society looks at as the worst of the worst. I agree with the late, great Mimi Silbert. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think a lot of times there's context that we couldn't possibly understand. People who are the most judgmental sometimes seem to be the most myopic. It's really sad when they lean on some spiritual teaching to justify their sense of contempt and moral superiority. That's like the least spiritual position you can take. Look at these sinners, but me, I don't need redemption. Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting perspective. If you're taking a theological or spiritual standpoint, you're playing a game there. You're hiding behind something. But when you look at those individuals, she would work on a behavioral level because a lot of these people, they didn't think that they were worth very much either. And as they started to engage in certain behaviors that contradicted their belief systems shifted to the point where, years later, they were completely different individuals. I had a friend of mine who I haven't seen in a long time, and his daughter works with people in AA, and she's talking about like on changing behaviors and how critical those behaviors are. And I think there's got to be a level of self-accountability. We're always concerned with holding other people accountable and what they should be accountable for. That's great, but self-accountability and at the same time, a measure of grace. I think those two things can coexist. And it's more likely that you'll engage in productive behaviors walking that line.
So many things you made me think of in the middle of talking then. I think of so when we realize so I just wrote down reason and fault, because I'd often talk about responsibility and fault. And I think about, so I'm going to use my journey as an example of the time when I realized that I had childhood trauma and that it was the reason that some of my personality traits had developed the way that, and behaviors had developed the way that they did, and some of the ways that I thought about myself, right? So there's us and our experience and our history, and then there's our thinking, and fault is this thing that we want to pin to something. So we go, the fault, why I found trust and connection and emotional intimacy really difficult was because I realized that I'd been through this childhood sexual abuse, and then over years of suppressing that, I'd found this way of being where I didn't have to get in touch with all of those things. And then when I dug deeper into those experiences and psychologically what they mean for different people and for me, and then I went, hang on, I learned about attachment theory, and we've talked a lot about that in other podcasts, and I went, my attachment style was developed. So first thing I thought was because of this, and then I went, hang on, this thing didn't happen till I was around 4 or 5 at the very earliest. Attachments seem to be formed much earlier than that. So then we go, so it was circumstances, upbringing, family environment. Then that's where we have to go, okay, this is where fault and responsibility becomes really important to delineate. I don't want to be putting fault on anyone else, nor myself. And also I don't want to call the way that I have, the beliefs that I have developed, a fault, because there's this us, the person who there's the us that controls our thoughts and stories, but then there's the automatic function of that's happening despite us that we don't yet know. It's like you get to a point in life and you go, I've got these self-limiting beliefs. I didn't choose them. Nobody chooses to have any self-loathing or any shame. We don't choose that. It's something that just kind of happens in our subconscious, and then at some point, sometimes we learn about it. Going down a big rabbit hole, aren't I? Is it making sense?
No, but it is making sense because there's context as to why we behave the way we behave. And again, that's why this podcast is called the Self-Help Antidote, because very often it doesn't acknowledge that or overgeneralizes that.
Yeah.
Where very rarely does it encourage people to understand why people do what they do and say, okay, here's how you challenge your own beliefs. Here's how you consider multiple variables. Read books you disagree with. Don't just listen to these audio programs. Go out and read scientific texts that challenge what I'm saying. You don't get that. Very often you get gurus who are like, this is the way, this is, and to a certain degree, you need to present like that. You have to, because if you don't give somebody a solid, clear takeaway, a lot of people get frustrated and confused. Give me the answer. It's very disconcerting that there may not be the answer. There just might be your answer. And that requires a lot of searching. And sometimes a lot of frustration. And sometimes if you're investing a lot on knowing something, you're setting yourself up for a bit of disappointment. It's not a very seaworthy ship to go out and float your identity on. It doesn't make sense, but they don't do that a lot. And in our society, we tend to value eloquence over accuracy. We tend to value confidence over expertise. I think on our show, we've used the example of, you have 2 people on stage in a panel discussion. One person is a novice, but they've got a great marketing team. They got themselves on stage at the show. Another person is a bona fide world-class expert. If the world-class expert doesn't understand how to present in a way that's confident. And they keep saying, well, that depends, because an expert would know that really does depend. Or, I need to check the research on this. I need to go back through the literature. And the novice goes, well, I don't need to check anything. I know for a fact this is true. And it's like, do you really? But who's the audience going to give a round of applause to? The overconfident novice, not the measured expert. Yep. And so many of those markers, we're interpreting them within milliseconds. And they might have been really valuable for us to survive. I mean, 20,000 years ago, somebody's like, okay, follow me. And you're in a precarious situation in a war, or you're on a hunt. And if you miss this animal, you're going to starve. Following the person who's most certain has benefits to the tribe. In modern society, it has kind of like a lot of pitfalls. So there was something in my news feed. I keep saying this. I have got to shut down my news feed. But there was this kid. I call him a kid because he was a really young guy in Florida, and he went into a Walmart. Walmart's like this mega store. Like, I don't know. You imagine a mega store.
I see Walmart memes.
Yeah. And being picked up and dropped into like a corner of this mega store. It's huge. And they called the police on him. He was Vietnamese, and the manager mistook him for a Chinese guy that was banned from the store. So he's like, oh, he's trespassing. Now, when you put these two individuals' photos, like kind of like if you look at this image side to side, these two individuals looked about as different as me and you look side to side. There's no misunderstanding that, but I'm not saying there was racism involved, or that some people think all Asian people look alike. I'm not saying that, but it's possible. And called the police, and the police showed up. And they were so certain that this person was trespassing, they arrested him in front of his, wife, girlfriend. And she's like, what is going on? He's shopping. It's like, we didn't do anything wrong. And look, not all cops. This is not a criticism on police officers. Like, there are police officers that are amazing, obviously. And there's police officers that are, well, less than amazing. But this particular police officer was like, that is not true. That is not the case. Absolute certainty. What would have really helped the situation is like, okay, what's the name of the person who's been, may I see your ID, please? Oh, wow. Okay. It says that, James is the name of the guy and your name is Frank. I don't know. Just random names. I don't know if that's a likely name, but anyway, you get the point. Could have verified that. But based on the call, based on maybe some cognitive biases in play, you assumed that you're absolutely right. And you wouldn't even entertain the fact that further, I'm not saying let the person go. I mean, because you're like, well, this person seems very sincere, I'll let them go. But verify it. This is something that can be so easily verified. You're saying I've done something. And I'm on record doing something. If I'm on record, you have my name. Check the person's identification. Oh, sorry. Completely wrong person.
Wow. So
go back to shopping. I don't know, like Martha Stewart towels or whatever you're buying in that particular shop. I don't know. Maybe they were buying Martha Stewart towels, it's a nice collection, to be fair. But anyway,
I had a session with Dr. Bill this week, and I found this really interesting. Yeah, the good doc. And I haven't even spoken to mum or my family about this, but I found it really interesting. This is, again, what I mean about that curiosity, always being curious about the origin and reasoning and functioning of everything. So we were talking about dopamine and emotions and ADHD in particular, obviously, because I had the recent diagnosis, and was just talking about brain chemistry and childhood. But Dr. Bill, he said what's really interesting is they've done these studies and it was showing the function of obviously stress hormones and dopamine production and noradrenaline and all that. He said in the last 3 months of pregnancy, the emotional state of the mother has an enormous play on the child, and how all of that neurochemistry then really hardwires and functions. And it was really interesting because I said, you know what I just thought of? My grandfather, my mother's father, passed away when I was 3 weeks old. He had lung cancer. I'm not sure. I never recall speaking about and knowing what the last few months of his life was like and what that meant for me. I know that when he passed, he was a very stoic man, and I know that he was very much about not crying and not, I don't know how much of what was suppressed. I don't know how much. Obviously, there was enormous grief for my mother afterwards, of course, but I actually don't know how much what she was going through at those last 3 months of me being in her womb. And that was just another additional, I've looked at other things at the early time of her life around the time that I was young and understand what impact and what that meant for our environment and our relationship as mother and child. But that was really interesting and fascinating to me. It's that idea of going, sure, we've got experience and trauma. Sure, we've got biological makeup. Sure, we've got genetics. Sure, we've got trauma and stories, but there's just so much that comes into understanding the origin and fault/responsibility and right, wrong. And yeah, isn't that interesting?
It's fascinating. And for me, I'm like, how could prenatal, perinatal biology not affect some aspect of who you are? I'm not saying that it's completely deterministic, but I'm saying it has an influence. And the problem we have sometimes in our society is you have the masses that are absolutely sure about why people are the way they are. And usually there's negative connotations, and they have zero expertise. They have not read one peer-reviewed article or even understand how to interpret that research, not to mention have sought this out. And then you have experts that spend their entire lives not having an agenda one way or the other, but following where the data, where the evidence takes them. It's like, well, you're just making excuses for weakness. Really? Like, you trust your opinion because of whatever, your upbringing, your faith, your social group, whatever, over people who have spent their entire lives developing expertise around human behavior. And sometimes they come to very different conclusions, but most of them come to the same conclusion around it is far more complicated than you think. And you're going to sit there and go, nah, don't buy into that. But in the same sentence, you consider yourself a learner. Well, do you value learning, growth? Yes, I value growth and grit. Do you? What does that mean to you? If you've dug your heels in and you decide in advance of being exposed to information, what you believe, and you will not be moved, how could you say you value learning? There's a contradiction there.
I recently talked to a guy. He got introduced to me. Gary Todd is his name, and he wrote a book called Annie's Boy. And one of the lads, shout out to you, Tony, who listens to the show. I met him at a recent boxing event, and he introduced me to this guy. He goes, "This guy's got a great story. You should get him on." And he grew up in Dundee, Scotland, in a really violent upbringing. So beautiful, stoic mother, Annie, and very violent father. And grew up in the schemes in, a really violent kind of, not much opportunity there, pretty scary place. And what I found interesting is this guy's just got this beautiful nature and shares this story. And it interests me because I said, how did you, and he's got a wife and a few kids now. And said, were you scared of what you're watching the relationship dynamics of a violent father? So your role model of that, like he slept and his mother slept with a knife under a pillow, and this man came in and out of their lives a little bit. So that's really shaping a boy's understanding of what love is and what a relationship is. And I find it really, I said, how did you not become a product of your environment? Because some people do. And this is that idea of how we process an environment and what we choose to, how we build our story around that and what we choose to do with it. Like, there was just nothing negative about the way that he spoke. And funnily enough, the first time I said, what are you, as a young boy, what are your first kind of memories of your dad? And I didn't say positive memories. My interpretation is, what do you first remember? And he said, he answered it going, I don't, something about positive memories, but he brought up a positive memory. And I thought it was interesting because I thought I didn't say the word positive. I was just asking. So that was interesting to me. He's kind of wired for that when we talk of memories, of looking for the good or looking for something positive. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. I just found that, fault versus responsibility. He had no reason to succeed, and here he is living in Australia. He's done amazing things. He worked really hard. He's a bit of an advocate for the underdog can come out on top, and that's fascinating. I was like, weren't you scared of being a father? Like, you weren't shown how to be a father. It wasn't hardwired into you. But here you are, being an amazing father.
And I love those stories about post-traumatic growth and how that shapes you.
But that's your story. Even more so, because what you went through is, you've done it, you've lived it. It's amazing to me.
But what I struggle with that, because I used to always tell my story because I thought I have an obligation to. Okay, I've had this whole series of horrible things happen to me and struggles. And at that time, I was far more confident that I had overcome it. And I had such a handle on life. So I'm not saying I was arrogant, but it's kind of like, now, like, you're that novice. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect related to my own self-awareness, not a lot of expertise, not a lot of experience, ton of confidence though, or false confidence. Overcompensation, whatever that was. But I always thought I have an obligation to share something tragic in a way that can be uplifting and contribute to others. And then I got away from that. I think I became very much a subject matter expert, which, I think anytime you get up in front of a room of people, there has to be somewhat of an intention to influence, to inspire, to evoke emotion, not just provide information, not just because of how that affects the learning process overall, but it's like, otherwise just send an email with some bullet points, maybe attach an article or a couple of research papers and be done with it. When you're going to stand up in front of people, there's a higher expectation and there's more depth and breadth to what it is that you come there to offer. And I believe that strongly. But I did get more into, like, let me talk about subject, other people's stories. I got away from my own story for reasons that, I'm not going to spend talking about. But I think now when I'm invited onto a podcast or when somebody wants me to talk about their story, there's almost an expectation, like, talk about the decisions you make. Talk about how strong you are is what they're saying. They don't come out and say it. Talk about, like, what a great decision maker you are. Talk about grit. Talk about discipline. Basically, talk about facing the hard things and doing the hard things rather than, being weak and using it as excuses. And for me, it's like, of course, there's good decision making. Of course, there is grit and there's perseverance. Of course, there is accepting the reality of what happened and saying, okay, well, how can I use this? Because no matter how horrible something is, there are benefits that come along with it. And I'm not trying to be insensitive to people who have gone through really hard things. Just even understanding the value of aspects of yourself. Like when you never have peace and then you do, you understand the value of peace so much more. You know, if you understand the value of joy when you've been inflicted with suffering and pain. So there's a contrast to appreciate. So there's always something there. But I feel that in a certain way it's dishonest, because yes, I did take advantage of opportunities. Yes, I did commit myself to learning, like especially earlier on in my career. I was learning, studying, you know, constantly from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep. And if I took a break, that was just to let my mind rest so I can get back into it. And then I would go out on the road and crack on and just share everything with reckless abandon. I'd do as many seminars as I could, as many shows as I could, whatever I could do, write as many articles as I could to share whatever I was learning with everybody else. One, that helps me because I have a linguistic learning style. When I read and when I speak to other people about what I'm learning, I get to retain it. So that benefited me, but I also wanted to contribute to others. So there's all that there. But I also ran into people who helped me along the way. I also had a few instances that if they had gone a little bit differently, you know, I could have been a tragic story. So for me, it's like, yes, I need to accept the things that I've done that have allowed me to overcome a nightmarish personal history. But I also need to be honest enough to acknowledge the things that were done for me that I did not initiate. I did not invite into my life. These things occurred. Maybe somebody saw something in me or maybe they were just compassionate, but these were things that cannot be attributed to intrinsic attributes that I possessed.
We need to all be aware that there is both luck and privilege that we are not aware of, right? So I'm quite aware of a lot of the luck and privilege in my life, but I'm also not aware of all of it. I can't be. It's just impossible. So I'm aware that I was born in one of the luckiest countries in the world, into a family with a roof over my head, and I've never been without food or education, and I've never been physically hurt or in danger. And, and there's been bad stuff too, but I'm so lucky and privileged. But I remember asking this of Dr. Bruce Perry, the godfather of childhood trauma, and saying, why back however many years ago when I started just journaling my thoughts about my abuse as a child, why in the middle of a sentence did I shift gears and actually write down, maybe I should thank this guy? And why did I focus? Why did my brain, not me. Yeah, I had a choice. Yeah, I was doing the work to put positive in and make positive sense of it. But why did my brain in that moment go and latch on to the positive and feel grateful and gratitude around it? Didn't get rid of the hard stuff. That's not because I'm good. I can't take, that's luck or privilege or something that I'm not aware of in my life happened or happens to redirect that. You can take 20 people and get them to do all of the same work and have the same mindset and learning, but because of the unknown stuff that we're not aware of and they're also maybe not self-aware of, it all lands differently, and that's what makes it tough, hey? Makes it kind of, to a degree, it's kind of impossible to, there's just a level of faith we have to have in the journey of learning and curiosity and doing the thing. Because there's just so much unknown about what's going on in our minds and in our bodies and our neurochemistry, right? Because there's the conscious stuff, but then there's, like I said before, about the dopamine and the stuff that happened potentially, possibly, maybe in the womb that gives me a hardwiring, right? So that in a particular emotional state, my mind is either receptive or completely not receptive to processing information in a way I'd like it to. This morning, my mind was, my neurochemical makeup of my emotional state was really receptive to having a great interaction with a human being that was just doing her job, and look at the result. That wasn't Yes, I did. I chose to behave, or I behaved that way in the moment, and I interacted that way in the moment. But that was because of the right chemical bomb in my head that made me feel positive and happy, and didn't, it's not because I'm good.
When you're saying this, this reminds me of something you had said earlier about it's what you bring to a situation that very often influences that interaction and your interpretation of it. Mm. So a lot of times it's the way you're showing up that's an influencer. I remember Paul Taylor said something. We were co-presenting it wasn't Melbourne, it was Sydney. And I remember he had said, there are so many variables. Sometimes it's a very hard question, what's true and what's false. And when you're in that predicament, maybe a better question is what is useful and what is not useful. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense to me. When you have this openness of yes, it's this, and what else is true, and you're open to possibilities and variables, you become less dogmatic about how people should think or behave or who they should be. I mean, there are certain limits where you have every right to expect that. You have every right for people not to break into your home. You have every right for people to not emotionally, psychologically, or physically seek to harm one another. I think within a society, those are valid expectations. And that's why we punish people who violate those rules, regardless of what it was that caused them to behave that way. But other than that, a lot of times we get very much involved in things that do not affect us in any way, shape, or form. And if you're open to what else is true, you become less judgmental. Yeah. So if you approach somebody as, okay, let's say you were once an addict, and that's how I define you, how am I going to approach you? Or if I saw this a lot in the fitness industry, if you approach people like I'm strong and you're weak, and that's why you had that cake over the weekend, or you lack discipline, you lack motivation, or you want the outcome, but you don't want it. And you have all these presuppositions about who this person is and why they behave, and you're not open to the possibility that there are variables that you don't understand. How do you think you're going to interact with this person? And you don't think this person's going to feel that? It's interesting. And then when they don't comply, which is not a great response. You don't want compliance. That's not necessarily enrollment and commitment, is it? But when they defy and when they're antagonistic, you use that discord, you misinterpret it as resistance. And you engage in behaviors that perpetuate that toxic relationship. And it's not them. It's what you're bringing. So in coaching and motivational interviewing, the word is discord, where it used to be resistance. Roll with the resistance. Wait, no, this isn't resistance. The first step is, what are you as a coach or a therapist doing within that session that might be generating a non-constructive response? Look at yourself first.
Yes.
And a lot of times we don't do that. We look at other people. You need to hold yourself accountable, but I don't hold myself to the same standard. It's a fundamental attribution error. Whenever I say one thing, but my behaviors contradict my stated commitments, like I'm always on time, I'm reliable. When I'm late, it's the traffic was bad. But with you, when you do the same thing, it's you're not committed. You don't prepare. You didn't wake up early enough, all of which might be true. But I give myself grace. It's everything else. But with you, it's some internal attribute that you lack. And if only you possessed it, this wouldn't happen. But not me. And the problem with the fundamental attribution error is the more you're stuck in it, the less able you are to even recognize it. Mm. So whatever you see in other people, ask like, okay, when have I exhibited this? Or when have I exhibited a trait that would have led me into this? Yeah. That's a much harder question. And if your answer is never, I'm this type, you're full of shit.
Great chat, Bobby.
I always love chatting to you.
I want to ask you, I've never asked you this. on the self-help antidote, who is your favourite? Tell us one of your favourite or even one of your latest favourite conversations or guests. Who should we listen to on your show?
Well, lately it's you. Like because I have gotten so busy. I'm putting out one show a week, and it is you.
Yeah, but you've had lots of way more amazing guests than me. Who's a standout?
If you ask me this question next week, I would probably have different answers. One person is Martin Rooney, because I went to see him last weekend. So I used to present at the Perform Better tour years ago, and he's still on it, and he's an amazing presenter, Martin. Like, Martin's great on a podcast, but you've got to see him live to really appreciate Martin Rooney. You've got to see him live. So he was at the Long Beach Convention Center. I just happened to live a 10-minute walk from the Long Beach Convention Center. I was in town. There was no way I was going to pass up an opportunity to see my old friend and colleague. And I went to a seminar of his, and it was outstanding. He did a great podcast because he is so enthusiastic. When he talks about enthusiasm on the stage and he shows up with unbridled enthusiasm, I think what people need to realize is Martin is the same exact guy off stage as he is on stage. You're not getting the dramatized or the presenter version of Martin. You're getting Martin with a microphone. It's the same exact thing. Yeah. So I liked him because he's so impassioned about cultural development. And we talked about culture. And I think, culture's critical. Like, there's nothing you're going to do with longevity that really matters unless you are building a powerful culture that facilitates those behaviors. I mean, if you could define culture as when common interests and values generate predictable patterns of behavior. That could be a definition of what do you mean by culture in the first place. So Martin was one. Dave Rosowski, without question, Dave Rosowski. I have a friend of mine, I haven't spoken to her in a while, but she's in the coaching space, and she's a very strong personality, highly intelligent individual. And she was like, that was it. That was my favorite. It was something he said. And for me, it wasn't just that one quote, but this one quote embodies why Dave Rosowski, in my mind, is such a powerful guest. He said, I want to say that thing. I want to say that thing that makes you shatter. I want to say that thing that has never been said to you before, that just makes you come undone. And it's like that's kind of how he sees the world and the power of connection and communication. And his space is, improv. And he works with actors, but he was also one of my favorites. Obviously Taylor and Harps.
Well, look, as I rein this in and wrap up, you have some homework, Bobby, because you don't have their names in the title, so I couldn't search and tell people what episodes they were. So by the time...
Do I not have their names in the title?
No. So by the time this episode goes live, you're going to find out what episodes they are, so I can put in the show notes for people to listen to. Thank you. Thanks for an amazing conversation.
Everybody's just realizing he didn't know you had to put it in the title. What an idiot.
It's so people can search it. It makes it easy.
Well, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
All right.
Logical.
But you also need to ask what else is true.
What else is true, though? Yeah.
Bobby's an idiot. Yes. And what else is true? So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tiff.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.